Hello, everyone. This is World Review with Ivo Daalder, a weekly look at news from around the world produced by the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. It is Friday, January 31. Today, a somewhat different show. Two panelists scheduled to join us today were felled by various viruses, and rather than subjecting us to their hacking coughs, they asked not to appear on the show, and we understand that. So we decided to shift gear. By the way, wishing you, Liz and Bobby, a very speedy recovery. Here's how we're going to talk, what we're going to do today. 10 days into Trump's second term, this isn't just Trump's America, it is now Trump's world. Everyone, everywhere, seems to have Donald Trump top of mind. So what does that mean? And how should we think about the world that is emerging under his tenure? I asked my good friend and longstanding co-author, Jim Lindsay, to join us today and help us understand Trump's world. Jim is currently the Mary and David Boyce Distinguished Senior Fellow in U.S. Foreign Policy and Director of Fellowship Affairs at the Council on Foreign Relations. Jim and I wrote a piece together on this question that appeared in yesterday's Foreign Affairs magazine. And also joining us is one of our regular contributors, Matt Kaminski, editor-at-large at Politico. Matt has been writing some big think pieces for Politico magazine in the last year or so, including one earlier this month on the opportunities for Donald Trump in order to make a world a better and safer place. You will, by the way, be able to find links to both of these articles in the show notes. So good morning to you both. Wonderful to have you, Jim. Thanks so much for jumping in. Always good to talk to you. We've been doing this for many, many years. I won't tell you how long because it tells you how old we are. But I want to start with you. We write that the Pax Americana is dead. What do we mean by that? Or in fact, what do you mean by that? And hopefully I agree.
Well, first off, Ivo, thank you very much for having me on the show. And it's great to see Matt. And I really do think the piece that you and I wrote and the piece that Matt wrote in Politico make really good bookends to read. I think when we think about Pax Americana, what we're really talking about is the world the United States created out of the ashes of World War II. It was a world sometimes goes by the name of the rules-based order, liberal international order, call it the American-led order. But basically it was premised on the idea that the United States would take a broadened view of its self-interest, that the United States would build up countries elsewhere, build up a network of friends, partners, and allies, and that would be the best way to secure American prosperity and American security. Now, that era was actually remarkably successful. We can go into its many successes, but one of the things it did is it helped sow the seeds of its own undoing as power became more dispersed. And if you look at the Biden administration, it came to office looking to reinvigorate American global leadership and put aside the question of whether the Biden administration had the right approach or the degree to which it succeeded. But the critical thing is that Donald Trump has never accepted the notion that American global leadership serves U.S. interests. I mean, if you go back to his famed full-page ad in the New York Times back in September of 1987. He has always argued that foreign policy as run by the United States puts us in a position in which we get played for a sucker by our friends and allies, and that we'd be better off having a much narrower, more transactional approach to foreign policy. He tried to do it during his first administration, and I think it's very clear from the way he's come out of the gate in his second term that he's going to upend many of the pillars that have guided U.S. foreign policy going back to the end of World War II.
Matt, is both the characterization of the Pax Americana, as Jim laid it out there, and this idea that it is now over, is that how you see it?
Well, it's hard for me to imagine Donald Trump mouthing the words Pax Americana. And I don't think he's clearly someone who doesn't spend his late nights reading history, kind of engrossing himself in sort of in the past. He is a man who's, and it's remarkable for someone who's 78. I think he is in some ways our first 21st century president. He is the one who has both figured out how technology is remaking politics, but also remaking everything, and how he can kind of harness it to his own personal benefit. I think he's also the first 21st century president in that he really is. He's as much the kind of leader as a vessel for the cultural, political forces that are out there. And I find it very intriguing that, the presence of Elon Musk in his myth. I always thought that, Trump was seen as a disruptor, but, maybe kind of nativist, obviously, kind of the protectionist. But I think he's a very different kind of Trump in 2025 than he was in 2017. And I think you're going to see that in his approach to the world that, yes, the solutions to America's sort of problems do not lie in the past. They lie in kind of forging, shaping this new future. I think everything is true. He is both an isolationist and an internationalist. He any day he could imagine him bombing Iran or striking a deal with Tehran. But I do think there's something kind of fundamental about him, that he obviously is a believer in American power. There is a contradiction in this, that you believe in American power as something that you project out in the world, or are you withdrawing from the world? And as both of you very well describe, sort of ceding spheres of influence to our adversaries. I think his smarter advisors around him would hopefully are telling him that if you want a strong America, if you want a powerful America, and there is great demand for American leadership, you challenge those adversaries. And lastly, this is a longer conversation which we're going to have. There is a great opportunity for him to shape the world because he is a unique political figure. He does have a fairly clear mandate, not as overwhelming as his people say it is, but it is clear enough going forward. And I think the world is taking him seriously in ways that it did not in 2017. It's only 11 days in. It feels like a year already, but I think we need to give him time to play it out. And I think there are really two paths that he can take.
So this is great because I think we can explore both of those paths. But I think I want to get back to this issue that you started with, which is that he's really a 21st century president about using technology and thinking about how to harness those forces to serve what? And I guess, Jim, and sort of when we talk about the Pax Americana and sort of the rules-based order, we believe that the best way to serve American interests was to make sure that we had allies and partners who were working with us. And I think the big disconnect, although recently he actually did mention mouth these words, but he never before talked about the United States being the leader of the free world, this idea that there is a free world that you lead, because many people in the free world that he sees, doesn't see as friends or partners. He sees them actually as problems rather than part of the solution. And is that the big disconnect here from the past to the future? And how does technology, to the extent we should think about that, as Matt says, how does technology sort of deepen that kind of idea? Jim?
I guess I don't know that I accept the premise that Donald Trump is a 21st century president. To me, in many ways, he's a 19th century president who's a firm believer in power politics. I think he believes that the United States is stronger than everyone else, so it should be able to get disproportionate gains, that he wishes to exercise American power to extract those gains. I think he interprets American interests much more narrowly than past presidents, whether Democrat or Republican. I'm not so sure that Donald Trump really grasps technology and how it is revolutionizing things. I'm actually not sure anybody really grasps how technology is revolutionizing things. And I think, to me, the challenge in looking at Donald Trump's foreign policy is it isn't all wrong. Okay, power does matter. There are challenges out there. You can, as a great power, make demands on your friends, partners, and allies. What I worry about with Donald Trump's foreign policy is that the priority or the ordering is wrong. I mean, if we just sort of step back, the major issue right now is we are in a great power competition. We've returned to the world of great power politics. And it seems to me in that arena, the fundamental thing you want to do as a great power is maximize the number of friends, partners, and allies you have. And Donald Trump, however, tends to see friends, partners, and allies not as part of the solution, but as a big part of the problem. So coming out of the gate in his first, now I guess 11 days, who is he basically targeted most? Countries that are close to the United States. And I have to think that Moscow and Beijing are quite delighted to see that happen. Now, I take Matt's point, and he makes it very well in his piece, that you could see this turning out really well. I could imagine a situation in which Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio, whose foreign policy views would have fit in any prior Republican administration, can channel Donald Trump's impulses and strike deals. What I worry about is that that's what Jim Mattis and Rex Tillerson and H.R. McMaster tried to do in the first term of Trump, and they failed because ultimately, at the end of the day, Donald Trump's worldview is fundamentally antithetical to that. He does not have a comprehensive strategic plan. He basically goes after particular issues and can flit from one to the other.
I just think that, I mean, what I meant by sort of 21st century, and again, it's not an endorsement that it's good or bad, and I'm also aware of his current fascination with William McKinley as the sort of the sort of potential role model for him. I think what I mean by 21st century is that he is the first, and this is Trump too, not so much Trump 1, although Trump 1 did sort of, as did Barack Obama, by the way, channel these forces of disruption, that the old order was being shaken up. So he is channeling now that Silicon Valley ethos of break things. The old stuff doesn't work anymore. Get some smart people, shake it up, and that's a good in and of itself. He's trying to apply that to the U.S. federal government, and I think he is going to apply that to the world beyond. I am very wary of sort of like when we use these very polysyllabic words, talk about Trump's, foreign policy, like he is telling us exactly what he's thinking most of the time. It's quite, it's basic gut, like, I hate this, that guy's my enemy, don't push me around. So that is also very disruptive. That is the 21st century that at least certainly my kids' generation lives in. And I sort of kind of find myself in between that. The things that we were used to, the structures, the approaches from before, are not the ones that are winning today. Someone like Elon Musk is remaking the world far more than a Jamie Dimon, who's really a 20th century banking kind of tycoon leader. And I think with Trump, he is just so willing to do the conventional safe things to do this. I'm going to do the opposite. Like that famous Seinfeld episode, the opposite day. Whatever they say you should do the opposite. As always with him, there's a complexity to it and a caveat, right? As disruptive and unpredictable as he is, there's a clear pragmatic streak to Donald Trump. He is actually fairly risk averse, not in what he says, but in what he does. And the first term, I think Mattis and McMaster did restrain him to a great degree. We did not pull out of NATO. Jens Stoltenberg, the NATO SecGen, talked him into, great job, Mr. President. You got the Europeans to finally, after all these years, start taking their defense seriously. He is very aware of a couple of things. One, he cares about the stock market a lot. He wants a strong economy. He doesn't want to be seen as the war president. So I as much as he's blustering on Greenland or Canada, I'm fairly sure we're not going to be invading either of those places going forward. And I think this is where the intriguing scenario for Trump is he going to sort of shake things up in ways that advance American interests truly and that make America the power that shapes the world, or ends up undermining American power? And this is, I think, where your fundamental point is, the other president that Trump loves is Ronald Reagan, and he wants to be compared to Ronald Reagan. And a column a few weeks before is Trump the new Reagan? Could be, but there's one thing missing, that worldview. I mean, love or hate Reagan at the time, and in retrospect, more people like him than at the time, but Reagan had clear set of values that he believed in. There was a consistency in his approach. And an America without values, an America without that kind of consistency is actually potentially a weaker America. But that's something that I think his team will have to kind of work through as events come at them.
I think the absence of a clear worldview. I mean, the difficulty of saying what is the Trump doctrine if the doctrine is to disrupt in order to find new ways to advance, to some extent, American, if not, but at least personal interests. But it is clearly there in some ways, right? But it is that I like the idea that he is shaking up the old order without necessarily knowing what the new order will look like or how to shape it in that new way. And I guess that's where the opportunity lies, but also where the danger lies.
But I think people voted for Trump because, just one quick thing on this point, like people voted for Trump under Biden. We were just kind of mopey. Like we Americans did feel, hey, we are a great power. Look at our economy. It's going twice the rate of any other country in the world. Our inflation is the lowest in the G7. Until DeepSeek last week, we were clearly ahead in AI, and I'm pretty sure we're still ahead on AI. We are, relatively speaking, a stronger power now than we were 20 years ago in the world, and yet we're moping around. And Trump is coming in saying, we are a great power. I'm going to sort of act like it, and therefore we should be shaping outcomes more than the previous guys were willing to admit. I think at heart, that is probably what most voters were voting for in terms of Trump as a change on the world stage.
Again, I don't know to what extent people voted for Trump because of foreign policy issues. I suspect relatively few. And this may be a minor point, but I don't think the American public going into November 5th, 2024 was wowed by the economy, even if economists were. And I think your factual description, Matt, of where the U.S. economy was is quite right. I think people would, though, believe the economy wasn't and isn't working for them. But I want to go back to this issue of Trump's worldview, because I do think he has a worldview. I think the real question is, to what extent is it strategic? Are his goals tied to a set of policies? And what I often feel is that Trump isn't very strategic. He has impulses, and then people backfill and try to build a logic to it. And I think, again, I can see how Trump's disruption, I think it's important to stress that disruption can be good, disruption can be bad. It's not a value judgment. But you can't begin by saying, well, disruption is inherently good, because it can lead to bad sort of things. And I'm not sure that Trump knows how to capture the benefits of his disruption. And sometimes it seems like it's disruption for disruption's sake. And there's also a time element. The fact that you disrupt something and get a good deal today doesn't mean that deal is going to age well. And that's where the shadow of the future hangs over all of this. And the question isn't whether you can get some narrow gains at the bargaining table today, but are they going to be gains you can sustain over the longer time? I don't know what you think about this, Ivo.
Well, actually, I think that let's take a particular question that happened this week, because I think it is emblematic of both disruption and this question of, is it going to work in the short term? To which the answer is yes, but will it in the long term? And that's the Colombia case. I mean, it's a fascinating case where the president of Colombia, what's his first name, Mr. Petro, was upset by reports that Brazilian deportees were shackled, and there were some pretty ugly pictures coming out. And he said, I don't want my people who are being deported in large numbers, and by the way, they've been deported in large numbers for a long time, flying on military airplanes and being mistreated. I think they need to be respected, and stopped 2 U.S. military flights with Colombian deportees from landing in Colombia. And Trump used disruption. I am going to use the trading system and Colombia's dependence on the United States market to get my way. And he did. I mean, no doubt, the Petro accepted the flights within 24 hours. And
wait a second, Ivo, Petro was always going to accept the flights.
Well, no, exactly. Exactly. But this is seen as, Right, but it's seen as like a great victory, right? Of the
certainly.
might makes right kind of policy. And I guess the question is from to both of you, think about it. So he got what he wanted in day one, but how is this impacting views among Latin American leaders writ large about how you deal with Trump in the future? And are they, there's the part of the commentary talks about Colombia has another trading partner that they could use called China. And maybe if they become less dependent on the United States, i.e. more dependent on China, they will be less vulnerable to the leverage that the United States has. And that, I guess that gets to the question of short-term gain versus long-term pain. And Matt and Jim, just how do you look at this in terms of Jim's point that there's a lack of strategic thinking? It tends to be much more tactical and in the moment and thinking about what are the long-term consequences of what you're trying to do.
I mean, clearly, someone told me once that Trump divides the world or divides people in the world into winners and losers. He's a winner. Putin seems like a winner. I'm going to say nothing about him. Schultz is clearly a loser, insert Germany. And I think in his foreign policy, it's completely tactical and opportunistic and whatever you want to call it. He wants wins, right? But again, I'm trying to... the challenge with Trump is that the room is so loud that it's sometimes hard to kind of think clearly about him. But I think it's... I'm really sorry, I might run out of battery, so this is a kind of a live moment. I'm going to plug my computer in. Is that Trump, I think if you say that he's getting wins, and some of the wins that he got in his first term were truly wins. I think he did move the world on China and views of the world on China. He did strike deals in the Middle East, the Abraham Accords, that were historic and have, I think, really changed the political discourse in that part of the world. I think the pressure, however ham-fisted it was on the Europeans, that was overdue and necessary. It was appalling when you think about it, appalling to the Europeans' own self-interest that when the Cold War ended, they thought they could sort of take all the money they were spending a lot of the money that they were spending on defense and push it into welfare spending and assume that the U.S. taxpayer would be okay with that. At some point, that would just kind of sort of blow up on them politically as it did with Trump. So I think similarly, an approach to the world, which again, it seems chaotic day to day, if you step back, you can say, what can he achieve in Europe? Well, he can hopefully bring an end to the conflict in Ukraine that protects Ukrainians security. What can he do in Asia? Stand up to China and really, come in with Japan and Korea to deter and check China there. Unfortunately, on global trade, which would be my other wish list for him, would be, the key to the Pax Americana that you write about so well was America created a global market for its products that made us richer. And this is where Trump's brain, Trump supporters simply, I think this argument's a little too sophisticated. Like the reason why we've been so prosperous over the last 80 years is because we made the dollar the fiat currency and we made the world our marketplace. And the abdication of American leadership on trade, which started with Barack Obama, continued with Trump, continued with Biden. That actually is, when you go to Asia, I was surprised. That is the main thing people were most worried about in Asia. Like, we don't worry about your submarines. We assume you're going to sort of build some great ones. We have some questions about, do you have our backs, but assume that our treaty obligations are in place. We worry that you are ceding economic leadership to China. And I don't quite see a Trump pivot there unless he can surprise us. But again, he's capable of anything. So that's where.
Jim, trade clearly is, and in the economic framework, it clearly has fallen apart. And I think the criticism that Matt heard in Asia about Trump, I'm sure he also heard about Biden in spades. Biden had a very sophisticated competition strategy for China that happened to miss one key component, which was the economy. And I guess that leads me to sort of thinking, if you accept Trump for who he is, which you have to, right, as good analysts and people, and you were in Mike Waltz's shoes, how would you try to help channel his impulses to actually take the power that America has and that he enjoys and move and use that in a way that benefits America, not just in the immediate win, but in the long term. What that is, and maybe the Pax Americana doesn't work anymore. Maybe, and in that sense, I think Matt's right. Disruption may be necessary, but what out of that disruption, how would you forge a path, and why is it that the path that he seems to have chosen, that you and I write about, which is the sphere of influence in the Western Hemisphere dominated by the United States, not having to worry about Europe and Asia in the same way that we did before, that's not a smart move given the power that the United States has?
Well, there's a lot there in that question, Ivo. Let me just sort of take a chunk of it, which is what I think Mike Waltz is doing and what Secretary of State Marco Rubio are doing, are taking Trump's threats, his demands, saying to people, he's serious, and this is a time for you to work with him to make a deal. I don't think that Mike Waltz and Marco Rubio have turned on their longstanding views in foreign policy. They're trying to take Trump's approach and to extract concessions on that basis. I think the challenge they run into is the same challenge that Jim Mattis and Rex Tillerson and H.R. McMaster ran through in the first term, which is at the end of the day, Donald Trump doesn't believe in U.S. global leadership. He doesn't believe in Pax Americana or rules-based order. You know, there's a famous briefing that was arranged from in his first term where Mattis had him brought over to the tank at the Pentagon, and he got this briefing on how actually America as a global leader served both its security and economic interest. And the president didn't bite. He just doesn't have that worldview. And I think that is the challenge. And my view is at the end of the day, it is presidents who win over advisors, no matter how good those advisors are. And I think Trump's worldview is fundamentally different. But I do want to sort of just tap on something that Matt alluded to, which I think is important. Donald Trump may be the most influential new voice on the world scene, but he is not the only voice. And I think we really do have to pay attention to what China is doing and to what Russia is doing. Now, the United States can benefit from having leaders in China and Russia that behave badly. I mean, Matt talks or alluded to increases about NATO members in terms of defense. Well, the real big change came about not because of Donald Trump or Joe Biden, but because the Russians invaded Ukraine. And all of a sudden, Europeans had to stop their holiday from history. Likewise, the United States has benefited greatly from China's wolf warrior diplomacy, which alienated lots of people. And right now, China's sort of overproduction of manufactured goods, dumping them on the world scene, is helping the United States, help the Biden administration, is helping the Trump administration. But I think it's generally a bad idea to base your foreign policy on the hope that your adversaries, your challengers, are always going to play their hand badly. And I think this alludes back to what you said, Ivo. The Chinese, clearly understand strength in numbers. They understand the power of the American alliance network. We have lots of friends, partners, and allies that they don't. So the Chinese have spent a lot of time trying to sow division. Russians as well. I expect that to continue. And indeed, issues that we may think as sort of more for fodder for late night comedy shows, like putting pressure on Panama over the canal or demanding Greenland, are the sort of things that have nationalist backlashes that really do have real political consequences. You can't dismiss those costs out of hand.
Matt, what about that sort of the secondary effects of a win-lose strategy, which is particularly if the win-lose strategy is about early wins in life, but in global politics writ large as well, that everyone has a choice, and the Chinese have a choice, but but our partners have a choice. And if you take the case of Denmark, where really there's a true crisis in Copenhagen about the Greenland issue, and the attempt now by the Danes to figure out how do you counterbalance the threats real or imagined, that Trump has issued with regard to Greenland. If you care about a strong NATO, this is probably not the best way to get it, or is it?
I mean, the one thing that I was struck by my travels over the last 12 months, and I really kind of was my mandate was to go to all 5 continents, the 5 major continents, and talk to leaders in all of them, is a couple of things. There's a great demand for American leadership, more than Americans understand and recognize. Certainly more than probably people in Trump's core constituency are want to know and hear. People want a strong America that supports their values, but also gives them security cover, pushes back Russia and China. I mean, Jim is absolutely right. These are serious actors now on the stage who are doing what they know how to do well, very well. If Trump does remake himself into a more William McKinley, we actually, we don't know really how to do that anymore, and weren't even that good at it, 120 years ago. Yeah, we got, Puerto Rico and a Virgin Island, but we didn't exactly create a kind of British-style empire. Our empire was always built around values and alliances and common purpose. I guess I come back to Trump's pragmatism and the pragmatism of people around him. It is remarkable. It is, before the election, we thought our economy was terrible, and suddenly now, the day after the election, people are much more upbeat about the economy, and it's the same economic indicators that they're living with. I think if Trump's sales point is, I'm making a stronger America, let's take it literally, make America great again, greater. The only way that pragmatically he can do that is through not picking fights with the right people, not losing fights to the America's true enemies. And I think, this is a challenge for his advisors. By the way, it's a challenge for the European leaders. They have to speak his language. They have to, not fully kowtow, but really, the Europeans should be saying, yes, we know you don't want to spend, too much more on Ukrainian arms, but we have pulled together an extra $50 billion, and we're going to buy a bunch of your howitzers and planes to give to the Ukrainians. And I think in that way, you could create something that actually looks very similar to a Pax Americana without calling it that. Both in Europe, in the Middle East, where you have a very sort of pro-Trump and a kind of pro-American, Riyadh wants to deal with us to guarantee their security, not with the Chinese. And by the way, in Asia too, where yes, the Chinese are making economic inroads, but the Chinese are much more distrusted and much more disliked now than they were 10 years ago across that region. And the one actually that I think the biggest Biden success in foreign policy is his, creating this condominium with Korea and Japan, Australia, Singapore, India, and really trying to kind of create an architecture to sort of check China down there. So again, Trump is so unpredictable that we don't know day to day. But I think longer term, this is my hope, not prediction, of what the world might look like in a couple of years if you take Trump at his word that he wants to make America stronger.
So I think that I would agree with this, that there's a huge opportunity. And I think Matt, your piece sort of lays that out. There's a huge opportunity in the Middle East to really fundamentally remake the Middle East. There's a deal to be had, I think, with Iran in a way that we haven't seen since probably 2003. A deal that significantly constrains the nuclear program in a way that the 2015 deal with Obama didn't, and importantly, adds the regional dimension, given that Iran is so weak, in return for lifting sanctions of some form. I think, and that could lead to a remake of Israel and Saudi relations, etc., and smart diplomacy. And I'll give Steve Witkoff, who is the Middle East envoy, a lot of kudos. He seems to really have taken this on very, very well. So there is this disruption leading to new opportunities, combined with American leadership, the demand for American leadership, which, Matt, I think you rightly emphasize, is there, given that there is a Russia and there's a China, and sort of it's there. I guess. Yeah, go ahead.
I would just say, jumping in, I think, again, what Witkoff did with Brett McGurk in striking the deal is pretty remarkable. And you can see Trump, where Trump starts doing stupid stuff is when his domestic political agenda starts bleeding into what he's trying to do overseas. So the thing with Colombia was theater. He has to show that he's deporting people. That gets into fight, but he's trying to throw the meat to his masses outside the White House gathered in. But when he is dealing with bigger issues like Ukraine, he's been very sensible in that one, sent the right messages on Putin so far. I think the Ukrainians are feeling better than they were feeling a few weeks ago about their prospects under Trump, that he doesn't want Kiev to be his Kabul that basically destroyed Biden's presidency by abandoning an ally. Middle East, I think Asia too, he's going to bluster with tariffs, but if the goal is to deter China, that will make those ultimately to deter China, that should make those alliances stronger. The danger always becomes that he hears something from Steve Bannon about, hey, your people are really pissed off about this. There's you're not fulfilling your pledge to throw the immigrants out. You're not fulfilling your pledge to keep us out of wars, or that's where I think he gets into really trouble.
Jim, I think Matt and I have been kind of painting a picture of potential, which I think is there, right? But there is, I also think that Matt hinted at part of the problem. There is a potential, but it requires strategic thinking and strategic implementation, and not shooting yourself constantly in the foot. And in some ways, Trump is a master of shooting himself in the foot to be his own disruptor. Sometimes he isn't. And I think Abraham Accords is a clear example. Countering China to some extent was too in the first term, though I have more doubts about how he will do that in the second term. So how do you see the potential, and how do you avoid him using the disruption in the wrong way?
Well, I would say I agree with the way Matt just laid things out. This could turn out really well. Sometimes when you play poker, you draw to an inside straight. So I don't rule out the possibility that everything could come up roses. Likewise, I don't think the problem is exercising American power. I think any successful foreign policy requires you to exercise power, to disappoint people, maybe to alienate your allies. It's all a matter of to what end, in what mix. And I think, Matt put his finger on the key issue. Are you picking the right fights? I am not persuaded that the Trump administration is going to pick the right fights. And again, I agree with Matt that Trump has taken a very responsible approach to Ukraine coming out of the gate. I think his approach is much more responsible than may have been suggested by what he said on the campaign trail. And I understand you should always sort of discount some of what's said in the campaign trail. But again, Donald Trump has also been very proud of being the person who is fulfilling what he promised on the campaign trail. So we'll have to see how it plays out in Ukraine. I think that the Ukrainians, recognizing that Trump might not support them, are going to be more inclined to want to negotiate than they might be otherwise. Big question here is, what will the Russians do? Do they have any interest in negotiating? At the end of the deal, it's the question of what is put on the table, and whether it's a good deal or a bad deal. I mean, we all know that you can always get a deal. You can concede your way to any deal. Likewise, I think the real question is, what is Trump's policy toward China going to be? And I think that is still to be determined. I am not persuaded that Donald Trump is on the same page when it comes to China as his advisors are. Now, that actually may be to the good, but I'm still not sure where Trump is on China, besides the fact that he wants to improve our terms of trade.
I guess I'm left with the at the end of this discussion, which I thought is really powerful and insightful, that the potential is huge for success, and the dangers are also big. I mean, the potential resides in Trump's comfort with the use of American power. He's very comfortable with using it in a way that I think Matt pointed out early on. Biden really never was. He was moping around and in some ways afraid of using American power, which we saw in Ukraine in particular, and to some extent with regard to Israel and Gaza. Trump is not afraid in using American power. The question is he going to use it in the right way, in the right times, and the right places? To Jim's point of, is he going to choose the right fights? And in some ways, I think the next 4 years is going to be a balance between using American power in the right way and doing it for the right kinds of fights and not getting in the way. And the Colombia case may have made him feel good. I actually think that our relationship with Latin American friends is going to suffer because of it in the short term. The question is, what do we do in the long term in a more positive way? And we'll see. Same is true in Greenland. Same is true in Denmark.
I would say, Ivo, just on that, to go back to what Matt said, I agree with him that there is a surprising desire for U.S. global leadership around the world, not in China, not in Russia, not in Iran. But as you travel around, people want to see the United States involved because they believe the United States has the ability to move things forward. But that desire for American leadership depends upon the very values that Matt alluded to in his comments. And to the extent to which the United States is seen as becoming just another bully that is putting people up against the wall, demanding things from them and not offering things, I think we may see the desire for that leadership go down. And I take your point, particularly in Latin America, where has a long history of anti-Americanism, Yankee go home, because of the history of the late 19th century, early 20th century.
Yeah, the McKinley lesson
on Panama. Yeah, and the blaster on Panama is totally unnecessary. These are domestic wins for him. This is not. I wouldn't even. You almost hesitate to put this in the context of a foreign policy. This is showing that you are, putting them in handcuffs and throwing them out. People who don't look like us, who actually we need in this country to make this country great in every single respect. Obviously there's great opportunity and there's sometimes great peril, and probably never greater peril now than we can remember in the last 20 or 30 years, because we are in the midst of an unprecedentedly dangerous moment in history. Yes, you can imagine, and the desire for American leadership comes above all from the direct neighbors of China, Russia, and Iran, for a good reason, because they see them as a great threat to themselves, but to a wider order. But you can very easily, I actually probably least worry about the Middle East right now. I think that is not a global potential powder keg because Iran doesn't have any friends. It's weakened. The other countries are thinking, about getting rich off AI, not about, spreading political Islam. But I do think that with Russia, Europe's fundamental weakness is really a problem. And you don't have to know much about history to know that problems in Europe tend to go global pretty quickly. You take some comfort in the fact that Poland and Finland on the border of Russia are pretty strong. The South is doing okay, but the core Europe, France, Britain, and Germany are as weak politically and economically as they've been at any moment in the last 30 years. And Putin and Xi, these are, Trump's right, they're strong leaders. And they know exactly what they need to do or think they need to do to survive. And, the odds of and on a very dour note, the odds of a World War III are probably much higher now. I was apparently they unveiled the new doomsday clock in Washington earlier this week, and that was a clock that Einstein and Oppenheimer invented to show how close we were to a nuclear apocalypse. It's now set to the closest time, I think 89 seconds to doomsday as it's ever been, and whoever makes that decision is, you can see why they think that. There is so much potential for trouble everywhere. And I'll leave with one. I was in Seoul in October, and you look over the hills north of Seoul, and there you have crazy North Korea. But now you look left and you look right, and you have crazy Russia, and actually the least crazy of them all, but still very dangerous China. And you have an uncertain America behind you, and that's a very worrying place to be, not just for South Koreans.
No, I think that's. I think that image is that we are all now South Koreans is probably right. And in some ways, we are all looking not only at the threats that are ahead of us, but importantly, the uncertainty about who has our back. And I think that's fundamentally what this conversation has been about, rich as it was. I want to thank Matt Kaminski of Politico and Jim Lindsay of the Council on Foreign Relations. Thanks so much for a really terrific conversation. For those tuning in, thank you. Always wonderful to have you. The articles we talked about are in the show notes, so please take a look. Send us your thoughts, and we'll be back next week with another edition of World Review. Until then, have a wonderful weekend.